I recently played Detention, and Detention, when I was going in, I was expecting a Taiwanese Silent Hill, and I didn't really get that. I didn't really get that at all. I got a semi-horror puzzle game with much more puzzle than horror, honestly. But it still had genuine, like, jarring and scary moments, though not necessarily from the horror elements, but more so with the actual like story. The story is very dark and weird, and it's a tale of like youth, depravity, and growing up, but more than anything else, a loss of innocence created through a society. God, it feels so weird saying a society and not like a meme format, but a loss of innocence through society and social interactions, which is very fascinating to me, especially the way everything is handled and is just so nuanced. When the gameplay is just you solve puzzles and sometimes you hold your breath or stand still or walk slowly outside of one specific instance where you run. Now, I know that's not really praise, right? It's not really praise to say, yeah, this horror game doesn't really have much like horror-esque gameplay, but that's not really the beauty of Detention. The beauty of Detention is as you play, you have a better understanding of the story at hand. And I really think that's really the crux of it. You basically go through and experience the events in this young girl's life that is her own Silent Hill. And it's very weirdly emotional and jarring and frustrating and upsetting, but that's also the point. It's not made as media that's supposed to be comfortable. It's really there to make you uncomfortable. And it's something I've been thinking about for quite a while, even though I think it has been a while since I've played it. God, I think 2 or 3 months. I honestly can never remember how long it's been. But it's enough time to where I feel really bizarre about the whole thing. Because I feel like I saw in on someone's life that I was never meant to see. But I feel like we're both better people for it. For seeing that experience, and for the protagonist of the game with her sharing that, even if, unwillingly. And I guess this whole thing is parasocial. But the reason I am using so little words to describe Detention is because, weirdly enough, I think this is a story that everybody should play. I think it's very important to read stories about governments overstepping, and for obvious reasons, about governments, societal norms, and especially about youth, since I think it's such a fleeting thing that people don't really give the attention it deserves, nor really take the time to really go through and understand the importance of, and just sort of the joys and experiences with it. I really think that's kind of an overlooked thing in stories in general. There's so many stories about rushing to be an adult and rushing through with adult themes when people kind of forget about their childlike whimsy and wonder. Not to say this game has childlike whimsy and wonder, but it has like the innocence of youth at the core of it. And I guess the cruelty and ignorance it can bring. And it's a very fascinating story for that reason. I really enjoyed Detention, though it's not something I really like. It's not something I really find joy in playing, though. It's a very moving and powerful story, and it's something I'd recommend to anybody. Though it is rather dark. It's not the darkest game I've ever played by any means, but it's very bleak at times, yet by the end of it, it's weirdly hopeful, almost, which I do rather like. I showed the game to a few people I know, and a few people actually preferred the bad ending, which I don't know, I found kind of like deeply worrying. But what I think is important about the game is that as long as you actively pay attention to the story, you get the good ending, which I find interesting. It's more so about knowing the character and knowing who they are, and that ultimately dictates how things play out, whether or not you were able to learn anything from the entire experience, which I rather like. I rather like that as an idea. It's not really a matter of collecting all of this specific thing or making like specific niche decisions that don't play into anything. It's more so, do you understand the story and who you are? And I rather like that. I really do. And Detention is such a weird trip through this school. And even though the school itself isn't anything remotely similar to like the mansion from, well, any Resident Evil game, it's very like simplistic in nature, it still feels weirdly winding and familiar, especially as you get used to it. The puzzles are creative and I do rather like them. And there's a lot of like, there's a few scares that work. There's not many in my opinion, but it's a very good game. The story is just beyond. I almost made a main channel video, but I would really rather encourage you to play it yourself. I feel that strongly about it. Detention is such a personal experience to me. I wouldn't really want to rob that of anybody else through the experience they can get through playing it the first time. Detention is a game that isn't really one of joy, but it's really one of, I guess weirdly enough, education. And to me, I think that's important. The education of youth, turmoil, and I guess of a poor person's situation and their own sort of revelations from it. It's interesting because Detention, for the name of the game, has a multiple meanings, honestly. But I don't really want to get into it because I'd be getting into spoiler territory. But Detention really does have an element of like, not just horror from like the Silent Hill scary monster sense, but or a representation sense, because the monsters in the game aren't particularly anything crazy. It's mostly there just from how everything unfolded. The real life events are more scary, I think, than the actual like detention bits, like from the game. It's more interesting to me to kind of think about this is how it happened, you know, and this is how it's shown through the lens of somebody struggling to accept and understand everything that did happen. It's fascinating to me, just how it's like a weird butterfly snowball effect, yet at the same time, it's also a weird story about hope and learning from one's actions, but ultimately a very sad story. I really did enjoy Detention, and I think you will too. Now, I guess my only complaints, right, would for sure be the gameplay. I think the puzzles are cool. I really like the puzzles, especially later in the game. I think the hardest part of the game is probably the first part, which I think is a little funny. But outside of that, that's kind of really it. And I guess other than that, I would say that the horror from the actual monsters isn't particularly very scary. It's very nerve-wracking, I'd say, like the first 2 or 3 times, but after that, it really becomes kind of like null. I don't know. Every monster encounter doesn't have like a special like pizzazz to it, which I know is a bit weird to say. So an example I would think of an encounter with pizzazz is in Soma. Okay, mild spoilers for Soma, but there's a character in Soma in an area you're at. I think it's like an office complex. I don't exactly remember. There's like this mutant looking guy. And if I recall correctly, he can only hear you, but he has very, very good hearing. And there's a part in it where I'm like 99% sure you have to break a window. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was very loud. And to that part of the game always really stuck with me because you can read logs about what that guy did prior to becoming a mutant, and it's really scary. It was, I don't know if scary is the right word, because I don't know if I'd be scared now. But it's very like, yeah, he's insane. He was a killer, and now he's like now he doesn't even have like sentient thought capacity, and he's deformed, you know? And I rather liked that whole section. I really thought it was just terrifying because it's not really, you can't really hear him super well, but he can hear you even if he can't see you, you know? And when you get to the end of the section, you have to call this elevator, and I think he just instantly knows your location or something, because you can hear him like yell and you hear stomping. It's like the most mortifying stuff. And that's one of the examples I use as like a good fear factor, I think. And like another good example would be the first time you play Resident Evil 2 Remake, there's this dude named Mr. X, as they call him. I don't know if that's actually his name. That's just what everybody calls him. And the cool thing about him is that even though you can't see him a lot of the time, well, you can see him quite easily when he catches you, obviously, because he's like unkillable. But even if like you don't immediately see him, you can mostly hear his big, loud, heavy boots. And that boot sound, God, just gives me anxiety thinking about. Because I remember being so scared that he'd just show up and just, I guess, teach my face a lesson in like how to be pummeled. And Detention doesn't really have any forces like that, even though I really think the narrative and the game would benefit from having some sort of like unstoppable force. Now, the closest they get to that is like the third monster, the one that only has like one scripted encounter. Two scripted encounters, but only one where you do something. The closest they get is that, but that's kind of it. That's all you see of the guy. I was very spooked of him the first time around, but I'm not really interested past that. You know, they don't really do anything with the monster, which I think is kind of a shame. But even though the monsters in Detention may be lacking, the story is more than enough, really. It's really moving to me. I really think this might be one of my favorite video game stories. It might take Soma as my favorite like horror story in a video game, which may not mean much to you guys as high praise, but it means an awful lot to me, because Soma for like eons has been like my top tier for horror game storytelling. But that's sort of the extent of it. Detention is really just a story game disguised as a horror game. I don't want to say a visual novel because you still like actively do things. It's more of a puzzle game, if anything. But it's a puzzle story game disguised as a horror game. And it's one I kind of think every adult who plays horror games should play at some point. It's really food for thought, especially to think about in our modern changing world and the state of things everywhere. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how it is. I can't really attest to that, but I don't know. It kind of just hit hard for me. And I really was just so impressed by the actual writing and how they handled the representation of the themes of the game. The way they represent certain items, especially through their descriptions and the journals you receive, is fascinating to me, because it's all very direct, but that doesn't change it from being effective. It falls into tropes, yes, but the tropes work. They work really, really well. And I can't say that about a lot of horror games, but that's really the extent of all I want to say about Detention. I want to say more, but I don't want to spoil a thing for anybody. I really think you all should play this. Please, I beg you. You really absolutely should play Detention. I think it may not be the horror game that's like the most flashy. I mean, it's not like you can see a guy playing it and get like look forward to like at the 13-minute mark when he gets like, oh, he's spooked because like, you know, a scary face jumped out and like screamed at him. But it's just so nuanced with its storytelling. God, I wish more people would talk about it and cover it. There's just so much there to chew on, and I don't want to rob that from any of you. So please, if you think you can stomach it, play Detention. And if you can't stomach it, please watch a playthrough of Detention. I think it would really do, God, just about everybody a really good, like, I don't want to say positive, because it's not really a positive story, but I think it's an important narrative to tell, and I think it's an important narrative done fantastically about youth, mistakes, and I guess oppression. But yeah, that's really all I got. So I really do hold a lot of love for Detention, and I hope you do too. And I love you all, I think. I don't know why I keep doing the peace sign. I don't really know what that's indicative of, but yeah, check out Detention.